Yes.
Okay.
We have started, sir.
Yes. Okay. Good evening, delegates across the country and across the world on the webinar which Panisha Biotech has hosted on case scenarios in Wilson's disease. During this COVID-19 lockdown period, entire medical community is interacting with each other for academic interaction through webinars, as well as we all respects, entire world knows that today only the medical fraternity and all medical professionals are taking care of the human mankind. The knowledge sharing, interaction, and updation is the continuous process. Whatever happens, we are using the available resources and technology to enhance and interact amongst the cross speciality and the same specialties for betterment of the patient. For this, we are having the Wilson's disease case scenario presentation. For it, we have the Dr. Naresh Shanmugam, as everyone known in the liver management specialty across the country. He is a senior consultant and clinical lead at Pediatric Liver and GI, Director Women's and Health at Rela Institute of Medical Center, Chennai. He will interact with the all dignitaries, Dr. Gautam Ray, Dr. Rohan Malik, and Dr. Jaya Agarwal. He will show them, interact with them on the case scenarios, clinical questions, and take the more expertise opinion on that. Dr. Gautam Ray is a DM Gastro, Assistant Professor, Division of Pediatric Gastroenterology at School of Digestive and Liver Disease, SSKM Hospital, Kolkata. We have the esteemed Dr. Jaya Agarwal, Clinical Fellow in Pediatric Hepatology and Liver Transplant, King's College Hospital, London, at present Consultant Pediatric Gastroenterology, Regency Health, Kanpur. And we have, along with them, we have Dr. Rohan Malik from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He is Assistant Professor, Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Clinical Nutrition, and he is a Fellow, Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne. With this, Dr. I request Dr. Naresh Shanmugam to initiate the session on the Wilson's disease case scenario.
Hi, good evening, friends. It's been nice to see you all. I think it's going to be an interactive session. I think everybody is a bit bored, and I think a lot of things are happening in their hospitals. Some hospitals are shut down, some hospitals are functioning partially. Still, even within the hospital, there is a lot of confusion how to do things, and still we are still in a confused state. But anyhow, I think we are getting a lot of webinars and webinars. Anyhow, we thought like it would be a nice place or a platform to interact between us. So we thought we can discuss something which is a common scenario and which would be helpful in day-to-day practice. We thought we will do it on Wilson disease case presentation. As you know, Wilson disease can have varied presentations and the outcomes are varied. So we thought we will pinch a scenario and we will go through the scenario step by step. And we have got 3 senior consultants with me who is going to take each and every step ahead. So let's start with the presentation. So can everyone see the screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So we are going to discuss on Wilson disease, diagnostic and treatment dilemma. To start with, this happened last year, sorry, 2 years ago. We had a 4-year-old girl who started to have jaundice, and within 15 days of time, her jaundice worsened. Then she started to have abdominal distension, and like within sort of 2 weeks time, roughly, she became irritable as well. So she presented to us with a short history of jaundice, abdominal distension, irritability. And this child is a well child before, no history of any jaundice, and was having normal development. And looking at the family history, there was a sibling death at 8 years of age with jaundice and hematemesis. They thought probably some form of liver disease, which they are not sure what it is. And this is a 4-year-old. Uh, with this presentation, Dr. Gautam, could you tell us what do you think? A short presentation, 4-year-old child.
Yeah, at this stage in pediatrics, the most common cause of hepatitis would be acute viral hepatitis. But this is quite a classic presentation. There is jaundice immediately in a short period of time, followed by ascites, then had some then there's some irritability, possibly an encephalopathy. So this is not the common garden variety of acute viral hepatitis. Neither is there prodrome, history of prodrome. And then when we see the family history, there is a history of death from liver disease. So this typically fits into the syndrome which we call acute and chronic liver failure. So, and whenever we talk of acute and chronic liver failure, etiology wise, we think of an etiology for the acute event and for the underlying chronic disease. So again, for the acute event, it could be an acute viral hepatitis for which we have to test. Could be some drug which we need to take a history, or it could be a worsening of the underlying disease. And in this presentation, in this age group, the underlying chronic diseases typically are the two things come to mind, which is number one is Wilson disease. And very close, whenever we think of Wilson disease, even though both the children who are affected are male, so autoimmune hepatitis is not the first differential. But Wilson and autoimmune mimic each other both clinically, histologically. So we should try to rule in or rule out Wilson and autoimmune in this patient.
Thanks, Dr. Gautam. I think exactly that's the point. I think in clinical practice, we do see children with jaundice coming and going. But when you see a presentation, there is a family history, and this child has got certain abdominal distension and also bit irritable, which is actually worrying. So if this child present to any GP practice, this child has to be immediately referred to a higher center, because this is not a common presentation, and this is an actually quite unwell child. So this child came to the hospital. So we did anthropometry. The child is growing well, and child has got ichthyrus, but we can't find any sort of obvious signs of chronic liver disease like spider angiomas or palmar erythemas. Clinically, we can't find a KF ring or cataract. Clinical examination, liver is just palpable. Spleen is 5 centimeter below the costal margin. There is some ascites with distension. This is the clinical examination. When we did the blood test, we found that the bilirubin is 9.2, albumin is low 1.7, AST, ALT elevated, and the child INR is quite abnormal. So we gave an IV dose of vitamin K, and even after giving vitamin K, the INR remained same, 4.4, and the blood hemogram showed low hemoglobin, but there is no obvious history of any bleeding and low platelets. So here we have got a child who has present to us acutely with jaundice, coagulopathy, irritability, but there is some features of chronicity like splenomegaly and ascites. Dr. Jaya, how would we proceed here?
Thank you, Dr. Naresh. That's a very pertinent question in this scenario. Before commenting on the exact whether it's ALF or chronic liver disease, I would just like to go through the definition of ALF in children, which is given by the pediatric acute liver failure group. So that says that for someone to define as having acute liver failure, You should have a biochemical evidence of liver injury, as we see in this child. No known history of chronic liver disease, again present in this child. Coagulopathy, which is uncorrectable by vitamin K administration, and INR, which is more than 1.5 if you have a patient with HE, and more than 2 if you don't have a HE, which is the case scenario very well fitting in our case. Then secondly, we should also look for subtle markers of CLD in a given case, which in history are like jaundice lasting for more than 3 months, failure to thrive, poor school performance, which is not seen in this case, but there is a significant history of SIB loss due to liver disease, which is very important and shows that there may be some underlying chronic liver disease. On examination, you have a shrunken firm liver in chronic liver disease. Splenomegaly, that's very important. Here we have a moderate splenomegaly, while in acute viral hepatitis, we have just mild splenomegaly at times, not always. And ascites is significant here, I assume. So it again signifies towards underlying chronic liver disease. On investigation wise, if you have thrombocytopenia, high bilirubin, SGOT more than SGPT, albumin being low, coagulopathy which is uncorrectable, and dilated portal vein on ultrasound, these may hint towards underlying chronic liver disease. So coming to the given case that we have features of acute liver failure in this child with evidence of uncorrectable coagulopathy, HE, and we don't have any history of prior chronic liver disease. We also have some features of decompensated chronic liver disease. So an entity which is known as acute and chronic liver failure comes into play, where you have acute presentation, ascites, within short interval from jaundice, hepatic encephalopathy, splenomegaly, and subtle markers of underlying CLD. So we know that there is some underlying chronic liver disease which has presented acutely here, but for all practical reasons, we will call it as ALF in this child because the child will behave like a ALF. So over to you, Dr. Naresh, with this.
Thanks, Dr. Jaya. I think the message is quite clear here. This is an acute presentation. Though there are certain subtle signs of chronic liver disease, this child completely fills in the definition for an acute liver failure. So what is the big deal about where the child fits in acute liver failure or CLD? It actually matters because acute liver failure behaves differently from chronic liver disease, and also in the listing criteria for a transplant. For acute liver failure, you can list them as an emergency, while if you categorize them as a chronic liver disease, you can't list them as in an emergency listing. So for all practical reason, we label them as acute liver failure because it fills in the definition for acute liver failure. So in day-to-day practice, when a child coming to you with liver failure, acute liver failure, a simple ultrasound which shows a coarse liver and a splenomegaly gives a real big hint that something chronically going on, and this child will deteriorate quite further. Because acute liver failure, most of the acute liver failure gets better by itself. But if there is some underlying problem like Wilson or autoimmune, these children would require transplant or further management. So, Dr. Jaya, could you tell about acute Wilson and acute autoimmune hepatitis? How this child would fit, where the child would actually fit in?
So coming to the case we have in this scenario, for acute Wilson, we have a very appropriate age. Any child above 3 years of age can present with Wilson disease, either as acute liver failure or later as chronic liver disease. We have history of SIB death, which again goes in favor of Wilson disease, which is an autosomal recessive disease. Then splenomegaly, low alkaline phosphatase for his age, fits in very well with Wilson's. Anemia, which primarily is hemolytic anemia. We need to work up here, whether it's primarily hemolytic or non-hemolytic. The against point which is here is no KF-ring, which is clinically. But at the same point, I would like to highlight that you need to have a slit lamp examination to be very sure that there is no KF-ring. It may not be visible from the...
expect KF-ring in a 4-year-old child?
not always, and certainly beyond 10 years of age we can see, and not always in hepatic Wilson. It is almost in 50% of cases we don't see at all in hepatic Wilson.
Thank you.
So acute autoimmune hepatitis, we are thinking as a differential. Then for this case, the gender is very important. This is a female child, and autoimmune diseases are much more common in females. Then anemia, autoimmune hemolytic anemia may be a favorable point for this child, but there are more against points for this. The age. The age, generally, if we have type 1 autoimmune hepatitis, which is commoner variety, we have more than 10 years of age to be presenting as liver failure, as in this case, but uncommonly, type 2 autoimmune hepatitis may present early, if in this case we are thinking of. However, there are absence of skin rashes, vitiligo, and thyroid disorders, which are again few subtle features of autoimmune which are absent in this case, and there is no hypergammaglobulinemia on the liver profile we have. So these are going against autoimmune hepatitis, but we need to go ahead with the investigations to be very sure. But clinically more fitting in Wilson.
Thanks, Jaya. So we now has narrowed down, probably this is a child with an acute presentation who has some form of chronic underlying disease. So either acute Wilson or acute autoimmune hepatitis. Though acute fulminant Wilson presents as an acute, usually these children will have splenomegaly, while autoimmune hepatitis, when they present as an acute, usually they don't have splenomegaly. So this is one of a subtle feature where we can differentiate, but still it's quite difficult to differentiate between these two things. So next we are moving on. So Dr. Rohan, how can we investigate this child further, and how can we infer the investigation results?
Yeah, thanks, Naresh. I think a couple of things. One is that, as Dr. Jaya said, it's got an acute component. So definitely you should look at the common acute insults that can cause decompensation in a chronic liver disease. Although it might just be just a sudden flare of Wilson's itself, that the liver's capacity to store copper has been overwhelmed, and that's why he is acutely decompensated. But definitely do the acute viral markers: hepatitis A, E, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, just for completion. Usually we don't see acute hepatitis C in children. And then hemolysis, the child has anemia, hemoglobin is 5 if I am correct. So definitely what kind of hemolysis is ongoing is important. So you must do a peripheral smear, look at the retic count, and the Coombs test is classically negative in Wilson's disease and positive in autoimmune hepatitis. Both entities can have hemolysis. But it's important to remember, if this child has received blood elsewhere, you might just get a positive DCT just because he has received blood. Then we come to the specific investigations, like the one for Wilson's. Then serum ceruloplasmin is what we do first. Only thing is that because there is this acute insult, sometimes serum ceruloplasmin, because it's an acute phase reactant, it can be high. So it can be falsely high. 24-hour urine copper, if you can get it with a challenge that you give 500 milligrams D-penicillamine in the 8 a.m. and then 8 p.m. 500 milligrams, and over that 24 hours you collect the urine copper. If this patient is not oliguric or in renal failure, often acute Wilson's patients can have kidney failure, so sometimes you can't get urine. Always look for KF ring. If the child is stable enough to have an MRI, you may think of getting an MRI. If other things are not contributory, you sometimes might just find typical changes of neuro-Wilson's on an MRI. Of course, genetic test would be very useful, but this takes about 4 weeks to come back. And then we do the autoimmune hepatitis markers, that is IgG levels, and ANA, SMA, LKM, which is the basic set for autoimmune hepatitis. You should remember these can be falsely positive in acute viral hepatitis and in acute Wilson's. So, I mean, it's not as clear cut as just getting a positive ANA. I would always do an ultrasound to look for hepatic venous obstruction. And liver biopsy, I'm not so sure that you should do in this child, but I think Gautam will talk about that. Naresh will talk about that.
Thanks, Rohan. I think this is the basic set of investigation. Whenever a child comes, Wilson disease is quite common in India. as acute hepatitis and autoimmune hepatitis. So these are the basic things we do. Acute Budd-Chiari can present with jaundice, coagulopathy, and ascites and splenomegaly as well. So essentially, we need to do an USG Doppler to look for the hepatic vein, and also it can give an idea about coarse liver, which is a hint for a chronic disease. Moving on to a further test, liver biopsy. This is a child who has ascites, coagulopathy. Dr. Gautam, would you actually do a biopsy on this child to confirm your diagnosis?
So single word answer is no. So even though biopsy is a very helpful tool, I mean, in all liver diseases, biopsy gives important information. So in Wilson disease, for the diagnosis, biopsy may not be mandatory because we'll talk about diagnosis later. But in autoimmune hepatitis, we need a liver biopsy. But in this patient, biopsy should not be done because obviously a percutaneous biopsy is contraindicated because of the coagulopathy, because of the ascites. So the option which remains is a transjugular liver biopsy. But again, the problems with the transjugular liver biopsy is that this child has encephalopathy, and so we may not expect much cooperation for cannulation in this child. And then it may be again a story of a hit and miss, as we can see in this picture on the right. If we hit on a fibrotic area, we'll just get some collapsed reticulin, and if the needle hits on a regenerative nodule, we'll get something else. So without taking it too far, in acute liver failure, no liver biopsy, this child has an uncorrectable coagulopathy, INR more than 4. So what is more important is monitoring. What is more important is listing for transplant and other measures. And if finally undergoes a liver transplant, we can get important information from the explant. But as of now, no liver biopsy.
Thanks, Gautam. I think the message is quite clear. In acute liver failure, doing a liver biopsy is actually not worth of what we are going to find out. If we do all the investigations, what Rohan has suggested before, probably we could come to like nearly 95% conclusion where we are. And doing a biopsy in an encephalopathic child, even trying transjugular biopsy because you are in a tertiary center or quaternary center and you have an excellent radiologist who can do a procedure, still it's going to be a hit and miss where if they are going to take the biopsy from the area where the cells have died, you are just going to get a collapsed reticulin. So at this point, I think there is no need for biopsy. I think with all the investigations, we just move on. So we did some of the investigation. Ceruloplasmin, which is slightly on the lower side, usual is around 20 to 40. Urine copper, without penicillamine, 24-hour urine copper is 180 micrograms. And confusing picture is you get ANA positive as well. ANA is 1:40. So what are we going to do now? Rohan, is there any scoring system which you can suggest and see whether we can sort of fit this child somewhere to make a more concrete diagnosis?
Yeah, so there are two scoring systems which are most commonly used. There are others as well. This is the one which was, I think, proposed in 1993 and then modified in 1999. This is a very exhaustive scoring system for autoimmune hepatitis, primarily designed for adults. It has the best performance of all, but as you can see, it is a lengthy document, and if you look at the individual things that you need to complete this scoring system, it includes liver histology, number one, and number two is that it also contains some HLA typing which you need to do, and also part of this is response to therapy. So I don't know in the setting of an acute liver failure how useful this will be to come to a diagnosis of autoimmune hepatitis. The other is the shorter simplified scoring system for clinical diagnosis. Now this is, as you see, much simpler. You just need IgG levels, the antibodies, and absence of viral hepatitis. But again, you need histology in this also. You need a histology. So these scoring systems, I mean, without histology, the simplified scoring system is incomplete, and the other one is too complicated. So coming back to what we were discussing about the biopsy, now I would like to ask Naresh now, would
Yeah.
you think at this point, when you have, ceruloplasmin can be low just because there is cirrhosis, albumin is low in that patient, so ceruloplasmin is also low. ANA really in this setting, I don't know how much, and then urine copper is the one that is pointing you towards Wilson. So do you
Yeah.
think, what would you do in this child? Would you think of a biopsy? Would you think of maybe treating both, or you want to come to this and the treatment part?
No, as I said before, doing a biopsy, even a transjugular one, if they are going to hit this area where
Yeah.
there is no cells at all,
Yeah.
and you are not going to find anything, and if you are going to hit this regenerating area where you are going to get only regenerative nodule, so
Yeah.
you are not going to get all your classical plasma cells and all
Mhm.
those things in this scenario. So in acute scenario, even if the child is stable, I think usually we wait for 4 to 6 weeks to do a biopsy. So I don't think doing a biopsy is not going to be helpful. I think
Okay.
probably what we can do is might be doing a penicillamine challenge and get it corrected. Moreover, whatever the diagnosis is, we need to see the child, how he is behaving. I think if he's getting worse, the INR is getting worse, is encephalopathic, even if it is autoimmune hepatitis, it's not going to respond to your steroids. I think we need to go for a transplant. So at
Fair
this
point.
point, I don't think we will go for a biopsy. I think let's go to Gautam and see whether he has some sort of scoring to see whether it fits in with Wilson.
Yeah, we have some scoring systems because as we have been discussing now, diagnosing Wilson is not easy. I mean, like we often talk about the alkaline phosphatase by bilirubin ratio, AST-ALT ratio. So in 1991, Berman said that is 100% sensitive. Then a few years later, it was refuted. Then Corman again came up with a ratio less than 4, more than 2.2. Then that was again not refuted by data from Dr. Harshad Debar Bhavi. So finally, for a composite, especially in a case with acute Falminen Wilson like this, and often in a case of chronic hepatitis also, the diagnosis is often difficult. So these scoring systems were developed. So the scoring system which is most in vogue is Leipzig. It was developed in 2001. So we have points. So if there are KF rings, we get a point of 2. If there are severe neurological symptoms, we have a point of 2. Typical findings. If the ceruloplasmin is less than, we know 20, we say it is less than 20 is abnormal. So we talk of something called the single digit ceruloplasmin. So if it is a single digit ceruloplasmin, we'll get a score of 2. A ceruloplasmin of 10 to 20 will give a score of 1. Then if we have Coombs negative hemolytic anemia. So I'm not going into the details. So these are the parameters. And finally, we have an urinary copper, etc., liver copper. So finally, we can find this in literature, and if the score is 4 or more, then we have almost a definitive diagnosis of Wilson's. 3, Wilson is highly possible, but more tests are needed. 2 or less, it is unlikely. So last year, an Indian version of this was brought out by Inasal Isfahan and by the Movement Disorder Society of India, and utility wise quite useful because a family history was given an additional point, and ceruloplasmin value less than 5 was given an additional point. They have made some minor changes. They have omitted the penicillamine challenge test because of methodological issues. Also, liver copper estimation is not routinely available. So whatever it is, Wilson's scoring system helps basically in the diagnosis, and it is good to have to try and diagnose Wilson disease using this Leipzig scoring system or the modified Leipzig score.
So this is applicable for chronic liver disease or somebody present with chronic Wilson. this system is practically not applicable for
Yes, absolutely.
acute presentation.
Yeah.
So we did a 24-hour penicillamine challenge, and we found out the urine copper was more than 1,200 micrograms. So we thought it's most likely this child is an acute fulminant Wilson. So Jaya, could you just briefly give an overview on not saying that we are going
Yes.
to treat this child, but just what is available in India at present, the current market, what are things which we do?
Right. So as we know, Wilson is a disease of defective copper metabolism. So we need to chelate the excess copper which has deposited in liver on the extrahepatic tissues. So we have two main varieties of medicines available. One is chelators, and in those, the first one, the age-old one is D-penicillamine, and the second one is Triantine, which has become very recently available in Indian market as well. So these two work as effective chelators and induce reduction of copper from tissues by causing urine copper excretion. The second group of drug is the zinc, which is acting by reducing the intestinal blockage of copper. So these are the three main medicines, but I would like to highlight that D-penicillamine, though has been the age-old drug and has been the very effective medicine, but in few cases you may have side effects, significant side effects, in which you may need to have switch over to Triantine. Though Triantine is a costly medicine and may not be feasible in all Indian setups, but still now it's available and we can have its usage. Coming to the treatment part, another thing important thing which I wanted to highlight is that the treatment is lifelong. You cannot stop medicines once it has been started, because the copper metabolism remains defective lifelong, and it should not be discontinued unless a liver transplant has been performed. For symptomatic patients, where the excess copper has already started causing symptoms, you need induction with chelating agents like D-penicillamine or Triantine, which are the first line. And once you have removed the excess copper, you can switch over to zinc. But that remains the option with the treating physician if he wants to switch over to zinc or wants to continue with the chelating agent. In decompensated cirrhotics, the recent ESPGHAN guidelines suggest that you should use the chelators like D-penicillamine or Triantine plus zinc. However, in asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic patients, the choice remains again with the clinician. Chelating agent or zinc, either of them can be used, though zinc is preferable in children less than 3 years of age. At this point, I would also like to add that these medicines take at least 2 to 3 months to show some effect. So in acute liver failure setting as ours, this may not be a scenario which Dr. Gautam may be taking over later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jaya, for highlighting the drugs available. So there are
I just
drugs.
wanted to ask one thing. I mean, like, what is, since all four of us are here, D-penicillamine has worked almost for most of our patients, and our experience of adverse effects is very less compared to Western literature. So what is your opinion?
So if I can go first, I have seen 2 cases of severe adverse effects. One had a neurological worsening, severe neurological worsening, and we shifted him to Triantine. This is at a time when Triantine was not available. So father had got a single user import license from the Drug Controller General of India. And then over a period of 2 to 3 years, we were able to shift him from Triantine to zinc. And this child is now grown up. He's a computer programmer now. So Triantine was really good for him. The second child I've seen had a severe reaction in the form of proteinuria and tubulointerstitial nephritis with penicillamine. And we had to shift. He could not afford Triantine, so we had to shift him to zinc. And he over time did okay with zinc. But by and large, majority of cases have done okay with penicillamine. Would you start someone who has already got some neurological symptoms and you don't want to start D-penicillamine in him? He has liver disease also. Would you start him on Triantine, Naresh? Or
ideally, I think the first line sort of in Indian scenario is penicillamine, even if there is some neurological issues. I think
Yeah.
if there is somebody, even there is no liver disease, having neurological dysfunction, I think the first line is penicillamine. Usually we give it for 3 months. If there is no benefit or no effect, as sort of given feedback from the physiotherapist or functionally when we assess, then we change them to triantine. I think there is no need for putting up straight away on triantine, thinking that it
We
can
can
work.
start with half dose and then go up. Yeah.
And yes, penicillamine, I have seen a girl who developed SLE with penicillamine. So it has its own complication, but it's noted that 5 to 10% can have complication. But I would say it is a good, it helps quite a lot of people. So we will,
If I can add on, I've seen a lot of neurologists in SGPGI Lucknow as well as in Hyderabad who are just maintaining their neurological Wilson on zinc. They don't ever try D-penicillamine. So that is what I have seen with the neurologist.
I think neurologists have a different perspective. I think they sort of let's not discuss here. I think when they manage, because these are all adult people, try to manage children. They try to manage, and when we even try to decrease the dose because having some complication, they won't agree with that. So let's not sort of discuss the way
Okay.
the neurologists manage them. Okay, so you start somebody, Rohan. This is for you. You
Yes.
start somebody on penicillamine or some chelators. This child is, I'm not talking about this child, some child with chronic liver disease, and they are coming to your clinic every 3 months. How would you be certain that they are taking the medication and the child is getting better?
Hmm. So one is, of course, clinically, if he has neurological symptoms, they improve. But in a liver child, you look at the liver function tests, you look at the albumin if it is improving. OTPT should gradually settle. I think over 3 to 4 months, there should be a substantial improvement in the OTPT. If you're not seeing that, then really you should think of compliance or sometimes even go back to your diagnosis. Sometimes. Two things you have to look for in the follow-up. One is the efficacy, compliance, and the second thing is side effects. For side effects, we usually do hemogram to look for any anemias or agranulocytosis, and you should also look at the urine for urine protein for proteinuria. And then for efficacy, look at the LFT, PTINR, and for compliance, you have to look at the urine copper if you are using a chelator. So initially, the urine copper is quite high. In the first few months, maybe 6 months or so, it's quite high. But gradually, after that, it should be between 200 to 500. Some people say 200 to 1000 also. So the urine copper after the first year should be between 200 to 500 micrograms per day, and you should aim for a serum-free copper of 5 to 15 micrograms per deciliter. Because don't forget, although copper is toxic, it is a necessary element for the body to function. So how you can calculate serum-free copper is you take serum copper, which is a value which is measured, minus 3 into ceruloplasmin in moles, and then that should give you the serum copper. So aim for 5 to 15. If you are using zinc and then you are doing urine copper, then you should, because zinc primarily has GI, it binds the enterocytes with copper in them, and then that copper is lost to the GI tract. So you need to have a lower urine copper of less than 75 microgram per day and enough zinc, that is zinc of more than 2 milligrams per day. But I don't often use this value. It will be interesting to note if any of you have used urine zinc and urine copper if the patient is only on zinc.
No, personally, I haven't.
Hmm.
Essentially, you should not underestimate children. I think teenage children, they can do anything. I had a couple of 12 years, 13-year-old girls who were on medication, jaundice got better, and then after a few, they actually skipped the medications, and then their enzymes went high, they became jaundice again. So it is very essential when you see these children in your outpatients, make sure they are taking the drugs and they are compliant, because once the acute phase is over, these children can sort of try to hide the medicine, throw the medicine, and do all sort of things because they think their disease is cured. So next we'll move to Gautam. So Gautam, do you think what is best for this child? Do you think we can treat him medically or need transplantation? What would you suggest? How would you deal in a real-time scenario?
So this child, so what we'll remember is he has coagulopathy, an INR of more than 4. So as a thumb rule, like an INR of more than 4 is unlikely to improve medically. And on top of that, he has hepatic encephalopathy. So this child, though we should institute medical treatment, this child needs a transplant, would need a transplant in all probability. So this again needs to be quantified. Here again, we talk of indices. The most top spoken about index is the New Wilson Index, which was developed in 2000. It was published in 2005-06. So it has the components of bilirubin, INR, albumin, AST, white blood cell count. And based on this index, the cutoff score, if we get an index and if it is 11 or more, then it predicts death without transplant with a sensitivity and specificity of almost more than 90%. But again, there is data which has shown that of late, this may not be very ideal. So there are other indices which are now proposed, especially in the setting of ACLF, which is the Cliff SOFA score, then the ARC ACLF score, the ACLF APASL Research Consortium score. The good thing about these scores is that they are dynamic scores. So we can monitor the scores, and if it is increasing, and again their cutoff is again 11. So we can get some real-time evidence whether this child is improving or whether this child is worsening, and whether to do a transplant, because listing for transplant and jumping the transplant list, all this is very important. And so that is what, so the basic message is we need to monitor the child, and some sort of index we need to practice daily on the child and maintain our notes. Yeah.
Thanks, Gautam. Essentially, I think there is some few case reports showing that children who are coming with New Wilson Index of 15 getting better and going home. What is more important with these indices is it needs to be done on a daily basis. I think we get a baseline on day 1 and see how these children are doing, because doing a transplant, it takes at least few days to see how these children are either deteriorating, improving with your medical management, and then take a call. Because as Dr. Gautam told, these are all dynamic parameters which change from even within few hours, things can change. So essentially when you use New Wilson Index, I think essentially you have to make sure that daily how this child is getting better, or you can score them on daily basis to see whether they are getting better. And also, Dr. Gautam, could you comment on plasma exchange and hemofiltration in Wilson?
Yeah, I mean, once a child is listed for transplant, these may help in bridging the gap to transplant. But because once we do a plasma exchange, we alter the parameters. So again, monitoring becomes difficult. So this is, at best, it will buy time for transplant.
Thanks, Dr. Gautam.
Like I have tried plasma exchange in few acute Wilsons in the last 4 years, not a lot, maybe 7 patients. And because our center does not do transplants for acute liver failure, I found that the PT-INR improves, encephalopathy improves for a couple of days. And then sometimes inotropes are also lowered, but then ultimately it doesn't affect outcome unless you transplant. So if you are in a transplant center and the child is unstable, maybe he is requiring a lot of inotropes, there is ammonia is high, then plasma exchange definitely will help you stabilize this before the transplant, I think. So important role in that scenario.
Rohan, what you are saying is a very absolute point. That's why we asked Professor Anil Devan to give a talk on actually how this plasmapheresis influences your transplant criteria. What he said is, I think you make an assessment of a child whether he requires transplant or not. So if he fulfills the criteria for transplant, that criteria stays there, even if you do the plasmapheresis. Because when you do plasmapheresis, you give FFP cryo, which will make your INR go yo-yo. But what you are saying is really that data. You said 7 patients. I think that's a quite lot of patients. And essentially, this data would be really helpful for many people, because many intensivists now think that doing plasmapheresis and bringing down the INR is actually helping people, and they only after 2-3 days of initiating plasmapheresis, now they are referring. So there is a quite lot of delay in referral of these patients. So this, whatever you have suggested, will definitely helpful for everyone. Dr. Jaya, so now this child requires liver transplantation. We know this is an autosomal recessive disorder. So can the parents be selected as donors?
Right, Dr. Naresh. So this scenario is a common scenario finding which in country like ours, where we don't have a very well developed cadaveric transplant system. So parents come as an option for living donor related transplant. And in a scenario like this case, where acute fulminant Wilson, where you may not have time also to get donors, living donor, the parents are an option. And yes, there has been a lot of literature of successful living donor transplants possible with the family donor who is heterozygous for Wilson disease. And as a part of workup, all these donors should have a ceruloplasmin levels, 24-hour urine copper, and should be normal range for the pre-transplant workup, because 10% of these heterozygotes still may have low levels of ceruloplasmin and may not be a viable option as donors. So as a part of workup, yes, it is possible family members heterozygous and should get workup for copper metabolism.
Thanks, Dr. Jaya. This is a quite important. I think every time when a Wilson child comes, we get into this discussion about whether we can use their father, mother as a donor. So the message is quite clear. Even if they are heterozygous based on genetics, still if their ceruloplasmin is normal and urine copper is normal and LFTs are normal, we can use them as a donor. So coming to sibling screening, Rohan, I think we are having 3 different scenarios. We have a sibling who has an abnormal LFT with normal urine copper, normal LFT with abnormal urine copper, normal LFT, normal urine copper, but genetics is proven Wilson. So how would you address, because this is some scenario which you see on day-to-day basis, how would you address each scenarios?
Yeah, no, sibling screening is very important, because sometimes we get patients and they were told some child has passed away with Wilson's, and now they're coming with the second sib with the very bad liver disease, and screening was either recommended but not done, or not recommended sometimes. So first scenario Naresh has put up is abnormal LFT but normal urine copper. Now this is possible especially in early disease. So you should do a definitely D-penicillamine challenge. And now more and more with the clinical exome being available, and the cost is little bit expensive, but still not so expensive, about 18 to 20,000. I would definitely, if the LFT is abnormal and urine copper is normal, D-penicillamine challenge, unless it is not diagnostic, then definitely genetics I will like to do also. But you can do the D-pen challenge, which basically is you give 2 doses 12 hours apart of penicillamine, and then you look at the urine copper over 24 hours. Anything more than 1575 is positive, but anything more than 1200, or I think if I'm not mistaken, anything more than 5 times the baseline is also taken as a significant increase. The second one is if you have normal LFT but abnormal urine copper. Now this is I think the classical pre-symptomatic child whose LFT has not yet become deranged, but he does have the disease. So I think you should then go ahead and treat. Usually we treat, do the genetics, go ahead and treat, usually with zinc, but you can treat depending on how you have to evaluate how much liver is involved. The third is LFT is normal, urine copper is normal, but the genetics has come back as positive. Now, sometimes you have to see whether what is the, so as a hepatologist, you should learn to read the NGS report also. What exactly have they given? Is it a significant variant? Is it a causative variant? Sometimes it is a variant of unknown significance. Is it heterozygous? So you have to, read up on how to interpret that report as well. And sometimes, sometimes the genetic reports are just wrong. So you have to retest sometimes. So, but then, if you retest and then it comes back as compound heterozygous or homozygous or Wilson's, everything is normal, I would just treat these patients with zinc. Zinc is safe drug. Only side effect is gastritis. Why to take a chance with the leaving that patient untreated? Yeah.
Thanks, Rohan, for an excellent overview. I think with this, we are coming to the last slide. I'm just going to summarize what we have talked through. Essentially, Wilson disease and autoimmune hepatitis, particularly type 2, can present as acute liver failure. When they present as acute liver failure, they behave as acute liver failure, and these children die quite soon, and you don't have much time to do all the chronic workup and wait for them. And these children would require immediate transplantation. And these two scenarios, two diseases, can be quite difficult to differentiate and pinpoint. So there can be sometimes dilemma whether to give steroids or give penicillamine while waiting for transplant, or what to do, or even if the patient is not in acute liver failure, this presentation can be common in chronic presentation as well. The dilemma is always there. So we have gone through certain steps where we can actually categorically say this is Wilson, this is autoimmune. And when a child presents to you with acute liver failure, look for subtle markers of chronicity, because as I said, most of the acute liver failures get better by themselves. But if they have features of chronic liver disease like coarse liver, then these children has to be completely evaluated, as they might not behave like the recovery might not be as good. In acute Wilson, who has presented with encephalopathy and coagulopathy, it is a direct indication for transplant. I think these children don't do well. Even with medical management, few days, they might looks like getting better, but essentially these children would require transplantation. As Dr. Rohan suggested, plasmapheresis can only act as a bridge, stabilizing these patients so that their inotropic requirements can come down, and it's easy for us to do the transplant and post-operative care. With this, I would like to thank all the faculties and the participants. If there is any questions, please put it up. Panelists, anything to be told?
No, I think thanks, Naresh, for a really good session. And I mean, some people ask, some people who are doing MD pediatrics, they sometimes ask you, so after you have done the transplant, what happens to the Wilsons? So can you tell us, do they still have any risks for other diseases? Like, of course, liver you have taken care of. Would they still have risk for neurological disease or tubular dysfunction in the kidney, or it goes away with the new liver?
I think all this problem happens due to heavy metal, just like heavy metal poisoning due to copper overload. I think once we change the liver, personally, I haven't come across anybody having kidney issues, or even if those who had kidney issues actually gets better because they are off penicillamine and whatever it is. Neurological, yes, I think even for complete neurological Wilson, we try liver transplantation. Sometimes it works. Personally, I haven't seen anybody with other complications after transplant.
Okay.
I think Dr. Podar has asked a question about low albumin can give rise to low ceruloplasmin.
I also asked the same question because Dr. Podar used to ask on rounds.
Yeah, so I mean, like ceruloplasmin is maybe raised as an acute inflammatory marker, maybe low falsely it might be positive because it reflects the synthetic capacity of the liver. Again, it boils down to the same question that diagnosing Wilson in this setup is difficult. But then if we have a single digit ceruloplasmin, then that is important.
And the clinical examination is very important, I guess, where you can have firm irregular liver pointing towards chronic liver disease, splenomegaly, which is moderate.
I think if the ceruloplasmin, like Gautam said, is low, like sometimes they will write less than 8 or less than 5 than what they can determine. That is truly low. But otherwise, like in this case, 15, that can be seen in any chronic liver disease, I mean, which is having low albumin. So then you have to be careful before you make a diagnosis, just on the basis of that.
There is some more questions from Dr. Podar. In the setting of ALF, due to autoimmune liver disease, whether liver biopsy is required. I think we discussed this point because doing biopsy, one is risky, and again, it's going to be a hit and miss in acute liver failure because you are going to have some areas of regeneration, some areas where you don't even have cells, and going to take biopsies at the end of the day might not sort of give us the clue about the plasma cells, what we are actually looking for, like interface hepatitis and all those things. Next thing, he wants to tell about zinc interference with D-penicillamine. I think this is one of the important point which people has to understand. At least there should be 4 hours gap between D-penicillamine and zinc. For all practical reason, it might be quite difficult to give 2 doses of penicillamine and 3 doses of zinc. So I practically what I do is I actually put them, I will tell the parents to give zinc in the afternoon and give penicillamine in the morning and penicillamine in the night. This is one of the reasons where I had a bit of row with one of the neurologists who tends to put the zinc and penicillamine together. And despite I am telling him several times, he refuses to sort of cut down 2 doses because children going to school, it's practically difficult to sort of space it out and having. I think rather than antagonistic effect, it's better to skip off 2 doses of zinc and put them in the afternoon.
Yeah, I do exactly the same thing. I skip doses of zinc because it becomes very complicated to give both zinc and D-pen together, I mean spaced out. So I would skip a dose of zinc. I agree with you there.
There is a question about what is the percentage of Wilson disease in children less than 3 years of age?
0%.
A clinical presentation.
Clinically
Yeah.
0%.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the lowest one which I have seen is 3 years of age. Less than that, clinically, genetically, we have proven 1 year, 2 year old. But clinically, with that presentation of having a liver disease, sometimes sibling screening picks up at 2.5 years and all. But presentation at 3 years is which is less than 3 years is rare.
There is another very good question that what is the evidence that if you use D-pen and zinc together, it is better than using D-pen on its own? I mean, there are recommendations, but they are not based on very good level of evidence. Nobody's done a randomized control trial. It's all anecdotal. So, I mean, there's a lot of variation in practice in where, like some consultants do not like to use D-pen and zinc together just for this reason that it becomes complicated for the patient. And D-pen is a very potent chelating agent. So you're not really achieving anything more by giving zinc. So whereas some people will always want to give them together. So there is some variation in practice there, I think.
So the message is if you have to use one of them, it is not only zinc, it is always only penicillamine. Yeah, obviously.
obviously. The another question is about why should ceruloplasmin be normal to be considered as a donor if you can rule out that the donor has Wilson disease? I don't know. I think the only way you can rule out Wilson disease in other form is by doing a genetic test. Then we are talking about a donor who is like 30 years, 35 years, and he is heterozygous. And if he hasn't developed a disease, he wouldn't sort of develop a disease any further. And obviously, doing genetic test in acute scenario might be quite difficult. So we sometimes there are adults with fatty liver, which confuses the picture. They have mild fatty liver with slight raised AST, ALT. So essentially, what we don't want to have is operating on a donor and the donor ending up with trouble. So we that the donor don't have Wilson disease.
So I think somebody's asked if patient is on zinc, LFT is not normalizing and they cannot tolerate D-penicillamine, what to do? So Dr. Jaya, what would you do? Would you
switch to Trientine, which is now
Right.
available.
is
So
there
that
any
means
update?
the child is not chelating well on zinc, that the excess copper is not getting excreted and it's still causing the liver damage. So you need to have effective chelation, and if D-penicillamine is not an option, then better to go with Trientine, which is an effective chelator and will solve the problem.
I
hopefully.
think, is there an update on tetrathiomolybdate? There was supposed to be an oral form in trials. Naresh, do you have any
Phase
idea?
2 trial,
Jaya?
Sorry?
that is in phase 2 trial still.
Okay. So oral tetrathiomolybdate.
Yeah.
Okay. And
If the synthetic function is normal, if the INR is normal and is not tolerating a higher dose of D-penicillamine, my first step would be in a resource constrained setting to lower the dose of D-penicillamine and see if that is working.
okay, very
And
good
we
point. I'd like to ask you, what is the dose of D-penicillamine? Is there a dose? Or I have seen sometimes, you can go up even to 1 gram a day and you just follow the LFT and the urine copper and you let that guide you rather than, go for the 20 to 40 milligram per kg dose, because in the end you are trying to remove a certain amount of copper from the body and you just use, it's like anti-venom. There is no dose for
Right.
the weight. It's just, it has to neutralize the venom. So I sort of look at it that way and even go up to a higher dose if they tolerate
Right.
Yeah,
D-penicillin.
fine, but that is a gradual process, and in these days of litigation, I think for a toxic drug, it's good to follow guidelines.
I think
Yeah.
in King's
But-
College, their drug handbook, I think there is a standard dose for children above 8 years. It's just 500 milligram BD. There is no sort of dosage. Only here we try to go on dosage basis.
Yeah. So 1 gram, you are very happy using 1 gram in a child older than 8 years. That means.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's it. Yeah.
I think they have only 2 doses. Less than 8 years, 250 BD. More than 8 years, 500 BD. That's all the dosage book says.
Very helpful information. And I think Dr. Pandu is asking this question that what are the outcomes with hepatocellular transplant in acute Wilson's? Do they do well, same as chronic Wilson's, or outcomes are not as good as transplant in chronic Wilson's?
No, I don't know whether he is asking about cell transplant or just normal standard transplant.
He's talking
Hepatocellular transplant.
liver transplant. he's talking.
Just
I think he means liver transplant.
yeah, liver transplant. Actually, the outcome after acute fulminant Wilson transplant is actually much less, 10 to 15% less than a transplant for acute liver failure of other etiology. I think the main reason being, I think probably the copper which has been circulating in the body is still sort of damages post transplant as well. And we had quite a lot of trouble in those initial days when there is no plasmapheresis or those things. But now we sort of tentatively do plasmapheresis before transplant and try to keep things in a controlled way before taking this child to transplant, so that these children are much more stable while on transplant. Even retrospective data shows that liver transplant in acute fulminant Wilson is much lower than for any other reason.
So acute fulminant Wilson versus other acute fulminant liver failure, acute fulminant Wilson outcomes are better.
Acute fulminant Wilson outcomes are worse.
Are worse after
Worse
transplant.
after or immediate post transplant. What I'm saying is first 1 week. Their intensive care sort of their requirement is entirely different from what we would do for other patients.
For the average ALF, okay.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
So any centers in India now doing liver copper?
There are some governmental agencies that do liver copper, Dr. Gautam. There is one in Pune which we used to use, but even in very classical cases of Wilson's, I have never found the results to be very reliable.
No, CMC Vellore does it. CMC Vellore, we actually.
Yeah, I was aware of only CMC Vellore, and SGPGI is probably starting.
Because we try to look at the machine. That machine really the cost quite quite costly. Nearly around 50 to 60 lakhs to quantify the metal in things, which private sector won't afford.
It's basically a spectrophotometer. I think you need to get a spectrophotometer. There is a National Institute of Environment or something in Pune, which we used to use when we were in SGPGI, but the reports were not matching with the patients. They were never very high, so we abandoned doing them. And I think with genetics becoming more and more faster, next 5 to 10 years, the turnaround times for genetics will become much faster and costs will lower. So I think genetics will start to play much greater role in diagnosis of Wilson's now.
Like any other metabolic liver disease.
Yeah. So imagine if you can get a report of a Wilson's gene in 2 days, then you might not even do ceruloplasmin and urine copper in that time because it's easier, faster. But that's like some.
Rohan, that's already happening for metabolic disease. Nowadays, neonatologists are not doing serum amino acid profile. They're just doing genetics.
Yeah. I think that's the way it's going to head in the next decade. Okay, I think Naresh, maybe you can wrap this up.
I think I would like to thank all the panelists and the people who are listening, and the team that hosted us. It's been a nice discussion, and it's actually nice to see you all people after a long time. I think we had a chance to. It's just like having a chat together, and I hope it's useful for people who has listened as well. So I would like to thank all the panelists, the sponsors, and the people who have been listening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naresh Shanmugam, and the participant, Dr. Gautam Ray, Dr. Rohan Malik, and Dr. Jaya Agarwal. This is a nice interaction, and very lucidly you have taken all clinical cases of Wilson's disease. This is 108 years of after diagnosing the Wilson's disease by neurologist Dr. Samuel Alexander Wilson in 1912. After that, in 1956, John Wells has discovered the D-penicillamine for the treatment. So hepatolenticular degeneration was the case.
I think so.
Now it is 2016. One of the ingredients life-threatening condition with ease and care throughout the life after the diagnosis of Wilson's disease during their when the supply of the penicillamine is not there, silamine is not there, we have seen that the mortality, and when the all hepatologists and the liver centers were approaching to us, our managing director Dr. Rajesh Jain has took this up very seriously, and the shortest time he interacted with the Ministry of Health, central government, and all of you have supported us to accelerate the things and we restored the supply of Silamine. During this COVID-19 pandemic, and the threat came initially from Wuhan city, China, the first call started coming to us is that something is wrong at China. China is locked down, whether the supply of Silamine will be there or not. And after India declared the lockdown, hundreds of calls started coming. What will happen? Whether we will get the Silamine? Thanks to Panacea Biotech sales team and all your support, you have provided the contact numbers, details, and we have seen that each and every patient and every center who is managing the Wilson's disease has been supported and supplied with the Silamine. And with this, we continue supporting you for academic front and your patient's care management by rightly, timely supply at the doorstep of each and every patient suffering on maintaining on Silamine who is having the Wilson's disease. So thank you very much, all of you. We will see soon again on this forum for the next academic session. And we conclude this, and I request Dr. Naresh Shanmugam to give the concluding remark of this session.
Thanks, Dr. Kunal, for comforting us, because this discussion, already we had a discussion in our ISPAGAN about whether we will run out of penicillamine in 3 months' time. Your assurance actually I will pass on the message to Dr. John Mathai that we won't be having any issues due to the lockdown. So I would like to thank all the panelists, you and Panacea, for supporting us. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.